Hello and welcome to The Stack. On this week's show, we speak with a fashion legend, Sophia Neophitou-Apostolou from 10 magazine. Enjoy the show. From Midori House in London, this is The Stack, 30 minutes of print industry analysis, and I am Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Sophia Neophitou-Apostolou is one of the most established figures in fashion media, known for her infectious laughter, elegant all-black uniform, and unlimited reserves of creative energy. That's what led her to found her own biannual publication, 10 magazine, over 20 years ago, and turn it into a commercial success, despite the challenges print media has faced in the last decade. The publication, located in London's buzzing Soho neighborhood, now also publishes 10 Man and has recently launched new regional editions in the US, Japan, and Germany. While building her media business, Neophitou-Apostolou, who is Greek Cypriot and has been raised in London, also worked as a stylist and creative director for brands such as Roland Mouret, Antonio Berardi, Elie Saab, and Victoria's Secret, giving her further insights into the business of fashion and brand building. This December, she will be honored for all her work at the Fashion Awards in London, alongside the likes of Tom Ford and Monocle CEO Remo Ruffini. Ahead of accepting her accolade, she talks to The Stack about her impressive career trajectory, the future of print, and the importance of non-homogeneous content.
So I had no idea. As far as I was concerned, we were going to lunch to talk about the Fashion Awards and what we planned to do. And they presented me with this letter. So as I opened the letter, I was like, honestly, gobsmacked. I literally sat in Arlington where we were having lunch and started to cry. I was so overwhelmed by, not just for me, but for the recognition for my work, for my team, for the people that work honestly, tirelessly to make the dream a reality. It's not just me. It's a village. And as cliched as that is, that's the truth. We all work so hard. And it was like a real moment of recognition for them, really, more than for me, because it's not just me. It just never is just me, you know. And it's great because, like, the magazine's almost been going 25 years next year. We've just launched 10 USA a year ago, 10 Japan this September, 10 Germany in March. And obviously we're now making it a scalable conversation because print is back in such a big way. I think post-COVID, so much changed.
Absolutely. And it's true. It's such a group effort, but at the same time, it is very much about you as well. I think you're being a little bit too humble.
No.
So, yeah, I want to talk about the beginning of your career as well, since I think it's an award that recognizes everything that you've done for the industry. So what was a young Sophia like, starting in the newspapers? You worked for British Vogue. What were those early years and how did they shape you?
So at 27, I had a midlife crisis.
Okay.
I was 27 and I worked for an architect on Berkeley Square. And I'd studied and I'd gone there and I thought, this is so boring. So I started to apply for jobs at the BBC as a set designer. And a friend of mine at the time was working as an interiors stylist at Elle Decoration. And she was like, what are you doing? Why don't you come and work with me and see if you like this? So I did. I went and worked with her for a couple of shoots. And I thought, well, I really love this magazine creativity because it happens quickly and you sort of exercise it and you move on to the next thing. So I thought, well, I really like this, but I don't want to do interiors. So I just wrote letters. I explained to someone the other day, there were no emails. There were just, you'd write letters, endless letters to different people, randomly hoping someone's going to say, yeah, come in and do a placement. My first placement was at British Vogue and it was working with Sarah Moa in the features department. And I thought, well, this is brilliant, this world, but I was old, 27 at the time, and I thought someone's got to die for me to get a job here because it was a very institutionalised environment. People went there and stayed there. They never left. There was not very much mobility. The creative aspect of what I did want to do didn't really exist in that environment. And in actual fact, a girl who I worked with, who now is the editor-in-chief of My 10 Australia, was the person to give me my first paid job a year into doing my work placement. So I work placemented with Liz Tilberis, who was one of the most amazing editors. And then for Alex Shulman, I went back and did another stint of work placementing, all at Vogue. But then eventually my paid job was with Alison Vaness, and it was like Today, the Evening Standard, the Independent, the Sunday Times. Newspapers were a very great way of exercising your creativity quickly. You could experiment. You only get good at what you do if you do it often enough. It's never about being too precious. It's, I've got this idea I want to do. Oh, that didn't work. Let's do another idea. So it's constantly, every week you had to create another story, another idea, another. So you're creating all the time, but simultaneously I was doing Italian Vogue, Dazed, ID. So I was always doing different things, because when you're at the beginning, you can. And then I think when I was 33, when my son was about 2 or 3, then I started 10.
And you started, I was reading about those the beginnings of 10. You had said that you wanted a place where you can have creative freedom, right? Which is something a lot of creatives, journalists, writers, I think, seek for. Very few dare to actually go for it and do it. And I'm curious, you started that. I think you very much achieved that. But do you think that over the years, more than 2 decades, you've managed to keep that creative freedom? Has the concept evolved a lot? What has the journey been like?
I mean, the journey, people were like, did you have a business plan? I never, ever thought, honestly, I never thought about it like that. I just wanted somewhere to future-proof my creativity. Because as a stylist, you're very reliant on, are you the flavour of the moment? Are you relevant to that brand now, or will you become dispensable in 2 years' time? It's a very transient business, it just is. Just the nature of it. People want change. People want that. And there was an amazing stylist that we did actually a feature on called Caroline Baker. And she was of the time of Anna Wintour when they were in England, Grace Coddington. She was like one of the eminent stylists of her time. And I started to research, where's she now? What's she doing? And then I found that she was working on New magazine as a stylist. And I just thought, for me, what I'd love to do at the end of my career is still have a place that I know I can come up with a harebrained idea, implement it. It exists out there in the universe as a dialogue of creativity. And I can continue to do that. So it was really I just wanted to future-proof my creativity. That's the motivation of it. Obviously, then it turns into a whole nother thing, You employ people, you have a dialogue that's global. It becomes something. It's always still really exciting for me to go to an airport and see the magazine on the shelves, or see someone reading it, or see someone has torn it out and stuck it on their mood board. That's what I wanted it to function as, a piece of creativity that seeps into all aspects of our world. So, yeah, for as long as I can maintain that, I will continue to do this. If it becomes a place where I can't, then there's no point me continuing.
And how do you keep that sense of creativity alive in a world where I'm sure you run a business as well, you have so many responsibilities? Where does inspiration come from and all these ideas? Because you do sound like someone that has a lot of ideas and gets them done quickly.
I do. I almost have a lot of, I see, it might be music, it might be cinema, it might be an exhibition I've been to. My head's like this big storage unit, and I can't wait to get the things out and on the page. And when I have to come up with the concepts of all the issues, especially now we've got Japan, America, Australia and Germany in March, everyone's going to interpret those themes slightly differently. I want people to learn stuff. When they open the magazine, I want them not to have a sense of predictability. I want them to be like, oh my God, I didn't know this about this person. I didn't know that about that. I mean, we put Marc Jacobs on the cover of 10 4 issues ago. We decided, we think he's brilliant. Let's put him on the cover to style himself in a story. We did that with Stefano Pilati. We did it with Miguel Adro. These are people that I just follow and adore what they're saying about their own creativity. So I think for me, what I always love is, oh my God, what about this person? This person is interesting. Let's talk about them in the magazine. And then it sort of resonates everywhere. And I love that. It's like someone telling you about a secret destination that you then are able to share, and then everyone thinks, oh my God, we can do that too. So it's like a little bit of at the top of that pyramid of creativity where we really can do whatever we want in the end.
And it sounds quite instinctive as well. Even as the company grows, you don't have rules about what type of person needs to be on the cover, what type of stories you're doing.
It's very, very organic. It's very guttural. Like, the thing for me is that I've always been a very intuitive person, and I've always trusted my gut. I have. I'm not saying I'm always right. Of course I'm not. I'm not infallible to make bad choices or bad decisions. But honestly, I stand by them because they're mine. And I feel like I've only got myself to blame. I have to be the one that takes the burden of that. Not the burden of it, because it's never a burden. It's a learning curve. And sometimes you learn good things and bad things. It's never just always up. It undulates, it moves, you make choices, and you have to be able to say, I believe in that choice. And at least nobody's there saying to me, yeah, you can do that. No, you can't do this. Because that's the reality of what it's like to work in an environment, obviously, where there are people that need to manage the situation, need to manage the communication. And even the people in my environment, everyone in my environment has a voice. You can be an intern or you can be a senior member of staff. We're all on the same level. We all are able to reach me or anything when we have our planning meetings every other day or every week, to say, I think this idea is great. And I'm like, explore it. Let's do it, So it's constantly fluid. It's never just a painting by numbers. It just isn't.
And when you look back, is that independence, both in terms of creativity, but also in a business sense, one of the reasons of your success recipe? You would say the fact that you have been able to achieve this longevity at a time when magazines come and go. A lot of them are folding, even brands that are much bigger and older than 10.
I mean, I think, honestly, I couldn't tell you what the formula was. It's not like a recipe for success in the business. There are moments, there are pivotal moments that you make choices that it's a bit like sliding doors. If you take one road, it will lead you to somewhere else, and maybe you get there faster, or you take another road and it's more of an exploration and it might take a bit longer. But what the reality is, the final moment for me is understanding that as long as I have freedom, as long as I can sustain that level of freedom creatively, then I'm winning. I'm winning at life. I'm winning at my job. I never want it not to be that way. After COVID, I just didn't know what was going to happen. Everything was so up in the air. What we've experienced since COVID is a growth that we never thought we could, because people went back to print. Because prior to that, everyone was like, we want digital, we don't want this, But what we realised really quickly is the luxury market really does appreciate print. There's a physicality of print now that is super important to our world and to the people that partner with us and to our reader. So it's almost come full circle, because when I first started, there were no such thing as biannuals. People didn't understand. They were like, you're not a monthly. No, we're not a monthly. But now people understand it because there's a lot more of us, and, there is sort of safety in numbers, but we all are quite different. We are very particular to our own, to the founders, I would say, like another is very Jefferson and Susanna. And, I feel like we can all cohabit the same landscape, but in a very different way. We all have our sort of lens on the world, on fashion. And that's why it's great, because there's so much of it. We can feed off one another. We can create together. There isn't the animosity sometimes bigger magazines have to each other. No, that person can't work for you if they work for me. It doesn't exist like that.
Yeah, it's a much friendlier, more collaborative community in the independent publishing world, right? And it's strength in numbers. Like
exactly.
But there have been a lot of these conversations, and there continue to be about print. The first print was dead, now print is back. And even if these things are not valid, I guess it has to affect you in some way. How have you dealt with looking at those headlines and listening to all those conversations over the years, and even now that people are still questioning, is it back, is it not, what's going to happen?
The only thing I can talk to with that question really is, we can see by the numbers really. And that's where there's been huge growth. And I think for us especially, because we've managed to become scalable in terms of existing beyond just the British market. I mean, we were always a global conversation, but now we exist in Japan, in Japanese, talking about the environment there. We exist in the US, talking about specifics of that region. Australia has always been, Germany the same going to be. So in the end, for us, the scalability of it has meant advertisers definitely understand that we're not just, maybe they'll be here, maybe they won't. I don't know what it's like to start a magazine now. I don't know, because there's so many rules now. You have to be DMR'd, which is a counting system. I don't know if you're aware of it, but if you're not on DMR, you won't be considered for advertising. No one cared about that when we launched. You know, it was about relationships. It was about my friend, who's still one of my best friends, Jo at Chanel. She just convinced her boss to give us advertising money. Same at Dolce, same at Cartier, same. There was no DMR.
It's suddenly more human.
Yeah, it was about, do I trust this person? You know, I went there not even with a dummy magazine. It was like a folder from Ryman's with like photocopies slotted in, and I was like, this is what it's going to be. This is who they're going to be. When I look back, I think, why did people gave me money? but it was based on trust. And I feel like now it's much more mechanical in a way, like it's measured. Your contribution is measured, and it's important that it is, so they can say, right, we've given this much, we've invested this amount into this brand, and this is what we're getting back. And that's what the men in suits need.
Of course, it's extremely hard for someone starting out now. For you, that you have those relationships and you've proven what you can produce the last 20 years. Has it also changed the way you speak to the brands, the way that you get advertisers in the magazine? It's
still a business of your relationships and trust. I tell you, I feel like I've known some of the people in this industry so long, even before I started my own magazine, so like 32 years. So there's a level of trust, so that when I'm launching a new 10 in another region, HQ can talk to the people specific to that region and say, they're a trusted partner, we can contribute to that brand launching in that place, you know. And I think that's what being in this industry for nearly 25 years can do. Even if you're launching new magazines, because that's what they're considered new, it comes with this whole back history of who we are, what we've done in the past.
And tell me about the new launches, because it's so exciting. You said you've launched Japan, the US, Australia and Germany now coming up. And it's at a time when a lot of other magazines are and across the industry there is a lot of consolidation. You're doing exactly the opposite in many ways. Why have you been able to do this?
Do you know, it was born out of my relationships with the people that I'm working with in those regions. 10 Australia was the person that gave me my very, very first paid job. So that's been going for like 12 years now. 10 USA is a year, but she was someone I worked with at Chinese and Japanese Vogue. All through my career, I've done lots of creative consulting for Japanese Vogue, 10 China, Russia. It's been constant, freelance for Italian Vogue, when Carla Sozzani was there. So there's always been this layering. Was the creative director of Harper's Bazaar in London for 18 months. So it's always been this constant understanding that I'm doing lots of different things. Because I think, look, as a creative, I mean, people were like, oh, how can you do all these things at the same? P.S. I was also a creative director for Roland Mouret, for Antonio Berardi. Hamlet was one of the people I worked with years ago. Elie Saab, Mugler at one point, Victoria's Secret for 10 years. So for me, I feel like there's so much I can do and say, and they're like different little compartments in my head. And I pull open the drawer and that stuff comes out that relates to that, and this stuff to the magazine world. But it all meshes together because you're working in a moment of creativity every day. It's really exhilarating.
And there's value in addressing a market specifically. And
oh my God, I cannot begin to tell you the importance of non-homogenized content. I think some of the bigger magazines have missed a trick. They really just have. Like the girl that I'm working with in Japan worked on Japanese Vogue for like 20 years. Dora was American Vogue, Chinese Vogue, Japanese Vogue for like her whole working career. So I have these people. Alison actually did work for Vogue Australia for like when she moved there. So all these people have had the most amazing training, but now they're empowered to run their own businesses. It's their business. It's in their interest to make it speak in the language of, not just as in the written language, the creative language of the country it exists in. So that has been the biggest impact that we've had, that's made the most sense, actually, because the growth we've experienced is because people do not want homogenized content. They want you to be speaking about their culture, their world. Yeah, I think that's where we've sort of evolved now to, yes, it's 10 as a brand, and there are mechanisms in layout, in design that look similar, but we are very much speaking to the Japanese audience in Japanese about what they care about. And in the US, it's the same. And in Germany, in Australia. So that's been the thing that I've been absolutely convinced of. And even in our conversations of future things that we're doing, it will always be non-homogenized content, because one size does not fit all. It just doesn't.
Absolutely. I mean, I could not agree more. You also just very casually mentioned earlier that you also worked with Victoria's Secret, Antonio Berardi, Roland Mouret, like big jobs.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about that aspect of your work, and also how it informed you as a creative and as an editor as well, and what you do in the magazine.
What we did as what I did with the designers I worked with and what I did at Victoria's Secret was, Victoria's Secret, you were designing themes, you were concocting these sections. There were like 6 sections per show, and you had to come up with storyboards. And so I'd like, it's Degas Ballerinas, it's Klimt, it's a film called Pretty Baby, but then I had to make sure that what I was communicating to the bigger audience was something that was more digestible for them, in terms of not everyone's going to know the Degas ballerina theme of things, or Klimt. So I'd be like Golden Angels, Black Swan. It was very much a constant, how are we going to make this tailored in a more digestible way to the mass? And that's really clever for me, because it meant I could execute my bonkers ideas of what I wanted to do, but tailor the conversation of what it was in a very specific way to what I wanted to do, because at the end of the day, I did Klimt, I did Degas, in my mood boards, but it was a more digestible conversation to the masses. And what I did with Antonio Berardi and Roland Mouret, I was involved at the very beginning with fabrics, with silhouettes, with fittings. I think a lot of designers don't understand that having a stylist that just comes in 3 days before the show, we are not magicians. We can't wave our styling magic wand and make it suddenly a relevant silhouette or a relevant conversation. There are people that work like that, of course there are, but for me that was never anything I wanted to do, because it's not creatively very fulfilling. And I think that's why I moved away from music video styling quite quickly, because you become wardrobe. It's very much, I like red, you're like, oh God. Not everyone's lucky enough to have a Gaga or a Madonna or a Beyonce that's happy to do the different things, So, yeah, at the beginning of my career, I did the Spice Girls, I did Skunk Anansie, I did things very early on, but I said to my agent at the time, I don't want to do music because it was a very different world then. It was very prescriptive.
I cannot believe the amount of things that you've done, Sophia. Selfishly, I am going to ask you, does that work ethic and the sort of drive and ambition, does it have anything to do with your heritage, your background?
We're both
for sure. Greek Cypriot,
yeah.
So something sounds familiar here.
Yeah, we are born to be overachievers. You can never do enough. It's a bit like, is that what you've done? Oh, you need to do, you do. My entrepreneurialness definitely comes from my my work ethic from my mum and dad, definitely. My sense of taking risks from my dad, who was inherently the biggest gambler in the planet, you know, like was fearless. And my mum was just so hardworking, you know. So yeah, definitely my heritage has a lot to do with who I am and how I never feel like it's ever going to be enough in a way. Like, you know, my husband's like, are you ever going to get bored of this? I'm like, no, why would I? I go to every show I go to is like getting into someone's brain and seeing like a new film, a new experience. And I feel like I'm so rich with all the experiences I've had over the years, all the McQueen shows, all the Galliano shows, Calm. Every time you go to a show, you have a whole nother experience. It's like eating delicious plates of food over and over again. You never have enough of that. So, yeah, but I think a lot of my drive definitely comes from my Greek heritage and not being afraid of being entrepreneurial, definitely, because people are like, how did you do that? Like, I went to the bank and they were like, no, we're not going to give you any money. If you were a restaurant, we could say, oh, you have this amount of covers. And so I was like, how can I get this money to pay for this print? Because the printer wanted his money up front. So I was like, fine then, I got a car loan. I was like, yes, I'm going to buy a car. Yes. And they put the money in my account that day. And that's how I started. But then you hear the stories of, you know, Giorgio Armani, who basically sold his Volkswagen Beetle to start his business. So I don't feel it's so far-fetched. But yeah, you know, at the time, people are like, are you mad? What are you doing? You know, I was like, never listen to the naysayers. And honestly, never take no for an answer because people love to say no. You know, they're afraid. They're afraid of what effort the yes might take.
Yeah, but a little bit of madness and guts does help a lot. I know you also keep it close to the family, right? And like you were saying, your team is, everyone is kind of, whether you're an intern or higher up, everyone's voice is welcome. So I wanted to ask you a little bit more about that and how you're able to attract and retain talent, because journalism jobs are maybe not as popular as they once used to be.
I mean, honestly, in my experience, I can only talk about my experience really, honestly. So I've got someone who I've worked with called Garth Spencer, who's been there for like 14 years. And his predecessor was there. We worked together for 12, even before I started the magazine. So Claudia, I've known since my days of working at the Sunday Times. So people tend to stay if you treat them well. You know, if you treat people well, they stay. And it's about making sure. People are careless in this industry. They're very careless of how to nurture, how to grow. A lot of our people have come as students and stay. And once we recognise they're brilliant, we just keep them. We give them the responsibilities. We give them the pay rises. We give them what they need to maintain them in our world. Obviously, people move on. Of course they do. But I feel like I will do my utmost to make sure that people are rewarded, you know, like just are.
And just to end, also, since we're talking about this at a time when you're getting your award at the Fashion Awards, and it's very much about the London fashion community as well, as even though it has become a lot more global. And it's a time when designers are having quite a tough time. The community itself is, I think there's a bit of a course correction going on. So what would be your message to the industry? And we look ahead to a new year as well. What would you like to see happen, both within the design community and media as well?
There is no quick answer to that question, because for me, what I'd like to see is people continuing to exercise their creativity. That's what I'd love. I mean, one of my favourite shows was Shapova Luena this season. They haven't got a lot of money. No, they haven't. But they've grown their business from a kilt business to a ready-to-wear business. And the show was like amazing. There's so much new talent, Standing Ground. I loved that show as well. Showed such an element of sophistication and establishment. I want London to continue to represent that level of newness. And, you know, so you sit in a show and you feel excited to be there. And what I wish is more people went to those things, more established people attended those shows, because trying to communicate about those shows virtually or on the internet, you're never going to get the sense of the smell of it, the sound of it, the three-dimensional moment when they're turning to walk away. Simone Roche's show was stunning. There's so much in London. People are quite quick to rain some sort of negativity on us. But ultimately, most of the designers that inhabit these brands globally have come from British fashion schools. That's the truth of it. And what I would love to be able to do is sustain the youth wave of what we do and sustain brands that have been here long enough to just continue to help them exist. And that's the challenge. It's always the challenge, money. I mean, younger designers now create a community that buy straight into the brand, which is the cleverest thing they've done. Honestly, they're not relying on websites to sell their clothes that are third party. They're not relying on, they're creating their little communities. Same in America, Loire. So many people there are doing the same thing, create communities, and they tap into that community.
So everyone should come to London Fashion Week
Everyone.
and buy 10 magazine, right? So
please.
Any clues?
Virtually as well.
And the new issue is in newsstands or launching soon?
Yes, it's been in newsstands. Well, the September issue is already out, but we have an issue that comes out that's a special boxed edition that comes out in December, and then the next one's March. So we're working on all of those things simultaneously.
Thank you very much, Sophia Neophitou-Apostolou there, and to Monocle's fashion director, Natalie Theodosi, for this incredible interview. And that's it for this week's show. My thanks to our editor, Jack Jewers. Any comments or queries, feel free to write to me, Fernando, at fp@monocle.com. We'll be back next Saturday at 10 a.m. London time. Meanwhile, do subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You've been listening to The Stack. I'm Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.